pituitary body, which is in charge of all physical growth.
Question in relation to the massa.
Yes.
It's an interesting name.
Yes, it is.
You said it was believed to be
Yes.
where the sense is
Yes.
initiated from.
Well, they perceive themselves.
Perceive themselves.
Yes.
Now, how, you know, in what has been learned since that time,
Yes.
in relation to the study of the brain,
Yes.
how far or how close are we away from what was actually believed as to what is now known with respect to that area and aspect
Well,
of the
this is
brain?
known.
Okay.
But they're not going to bring this out.
Okay.
Because in knowing this, and you know, by the way, if I can also say this, if you watch movies, particularly when you're dealing with Western civilization and you see a king with a crown on his head, you'll see that he has 3 jewels, and that's what those jewels represent. They represent the jewels of your brain. You see, the crown was really meant to physically symbolize what was going on the inside. When you look at kings' crowns, they don't have jewels all around. They don't have those prongs all around. They basically have 3. And in ancient Kemetic and many African civilizations, you actually have on the crown they put on their head places where they strategically would be located. Many temples were built, the pyramids were built with these rooms obviously dedicated to these different, what they call the royal 3. So you have in the brain the ability to even look at the development and the concept of life.
So you mean people should look beyond the great dialogue and the sword fights when they watch movies?
Oh, absolutely, man, because that's really trying to protect what they're really trying to hide. Because the reality is that all of this is in front of us, and what I attempt to tell our community is that all of this information is here. Mm-hmm. It's not really sometimes even hidden anymore. It's just that it is so scattered in different kinds of situations that it's hard to see it. What I have attempted to do in developing curriculum is bring these together.
Well, you can hide a lot of things in the open.
Oh, absolutely. That's true, too. And again, if you make someone blind to their reality, it could be right in front of them and they still don't see it.
Sure.
You see, but this information is vital to understand in terms of the role that the ventricular system plays. And in this hole in the head, which is the middle hole, what happens at birth, and as this fetus, this body, this essence develops itself, the lateral ventricles squeeze themselves. And in squeezing themselves, as the brain begins to develop, it squeezes itself, and then it opens up a tube that then creates the 3rd ventricle. And you see, the 3rd ventricle, that's the key to what opened up our ability to see ourselves on a spiritual level, to understand our lives on a spiritual level, and to understand the far deeper meanings in life. This stuff we're dealing with now is so shallow. We have been for the past, I would dare say, I know for the past 500 years, we have been devolving as a people. We have been losing our abilities to see the higher levels of consciousness as we try to get all of the sneakers that we possibly can, as we chase after the material world. And we as African people, we like good things. We like good life. You can see the gold of Africa, the clothing of Africa, the kinds of clothing that you're wearing, the jewels that we wore as a people, the foods that we ate. We like the good life. But we're not willing to get the good life at the expense of someone else's life. And I think that this is the problem that we're having now. When we were in Africa amongst ourselves, there was enough to share with everybody. That's what built pyramids.
We talked a little bit about a couple of things. You just mentioned something right there, and 3 things ran past my mind. We talked about the ancestral memory pool.
Yes, yes.
The ability, as you say, we've devolved because
Absolutely.
the ability to decipher information that we're no longer, that intuitive aspect of our being, we no longer value because this culture doesn't really value that.
Sure.
And out of that comes this obsession with physical.
Sure.
Nothing deeper than that.
Yeah.
What you see is actually all there is.
Yes.
So we are stuck in reality, but there is no no look at the potentiality,
Yeah, exactly.
which is the greater space.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
that is always evolving and offering greater
Absolutely.
opportunities and potential for
Absolutely.
us. The symbolism, again, if you can touch on just a little bit about that, because that is so critical, because everything is about symbolism.
Sure.
In some way or fashion. So.
And you see, symbolism came about through the human mind. And when I say that, the way in which we can look at symbol and understand it is to look at what we teach in school called figurative language. Figurative language, we could say, is the simile and the metaphor, symbols, personification. When you give a so-called inanimate object the role of a human being, like for instance when in the Aten text when it says, and it's talking about the sun, and it says, Aten, hail Aten, O Ra, you kiss the face of those who stand before you. See, that's personification. It gave the sun the ability to give the concept of having lips to kiss somebody. That's personification. Then you have foreshadowing and flashback. Foreshadow is, well, flashback is the ability to move back in the past. Foreshadow is the ability to foresee into the future, but you're both doing both in the present time. Symbol comes out of the ability of the human being to want to make multiple relationships, but at the same time use different signs. When we deal with symbols, we should use the word sign. So that in certain areas, like a sign would be a dung beetle, but the symbol would be the process of becoming. The sign might be the sun, but the concept would be eternal life. So the symbol plays a very important role in a human being's ability to deal with the metaphor, to be able to say the same thing in other ways so that other people can get a message of what you're saying. Professor John Henry Clark would have said talking in a circle, where you are topic centered, but you're also topic associated, which means that sometimes when you're on a point, to get everybody in the classroom, you have to get off point, but still associate to the point, but go off and then say it another way.
Relatability.
Exactly. See, and as an African people, what we would do is that we would play the metaphor. We still do it today.
That's almost diametrically opposed, though, to this, to the Western society in terms of the linear approach to everything.
Absolutely. The inability to be able to see the multi-referential.
To be off the line is to be wrong.
Exactly.
It's not to be different, it's to be wrong.
Exactly. And you see, you can't be off the line. Only if the line that you make is so rigid. You see, you can't be off the circle, but you can be off a line. But the thing is to know when you should be on a circle and when you should be on a line. What they have developed is, as Malcolm has said, a language that in and of itself can tell untruths when even the person speaking doesn't mean to lie. In Africa, for instance, you could have one word with multiple sounds. And according to how you said that word, it meant the context of what you were saying. If I were to say burrow, you wouldn't know what I was talking about. So in a sense, Malcolm was absolutely, he was correct in terms of his analysis of language. Because if you said burrow, now in the African phrase, I would have to intone burrow. Either I would stress burrow, burrow, and then by the way in which I said it, you would know if I was talking about the donkey, Manhattan, Bronx, or whatever borough, or if I was talking about a whole. So the whole concept of language comes out of symbol. And the way in which we are being spoken to, the way in which this structure is created.
This is part 2 of a 4-part series which we have discussed with Booker T. Coleman. And this part of the program, we're going to look at the role of spiritual development and the role melanin plays in that. When we left basically looking at the question of symbolism, how that played itself out in a significance in both culture and how people interpret certain concepts. Spiritual development, it's not an area that a lot of people think of in relation to who they are. And in the context of African people, the role of melanin.
Sure.
So when you say spiritual development, how do you pose that such that, you know, a person can again relate to the concept as they relate to their spirituality?
Sure. Well, you know, the key is to look at it from an African-centered perspective, or look at it from the way in which we as an African people would look at it, or holistic people, and that is that there are 3 dynamics. There's the physical, there's the spiritual, and there's the mental. The mental is almost like the mid-entity between the spirit and the physical. And melanin itself is a byproduct, and that it is a viable chemical within our body that releases and allows us to go through the process of life. The symbolism of it is important because when we're talking about King Tut, when we're talking about the 18th dynasty, when we're talking about the kinds of information that we need to be looking at, what we see is that during King Tut's time, the writings that the ancient Kemites wrote about clearly understood certain things about the brain. They understood it on a physical level, they understood the process or the mental level of thinking, and then they understood that upon certain vibratory levels, thinking on certain levels, utilizing the physicalness of the melanin byproduct, that you in fact could raise yourself to spiritual dimensions. The evidence of this is really outstanding, particularly when you look at the work of Dr. Richard King. Let's go into King Tut's tomb and see what was found. We spoke last time about the 3 shrines and the 1 sarcophagus. In other words, the mind, the soul, and the spirit with 3 shrines.